This episode is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the #1 seller of games and gaming accessories. And GatheringMagic.com, the #1 resource for Magic the Gathering news and articles.
Hey everybody, it's Josh, also known as Riker Rider, and this is my Basandra Battle Seraph Commander deck. Now, before the original Magic the Gathering Commander decks were released, a year and a half ago, I've been looking to build a red-white Commander deck just because I wanted the challenge of using the least powerful two-color pair. And then about the time when I started gathering pieces to build a Brian Stoutarm Giant Tribal red-white Commander deck, it was... what's the word I'm looking for? It was announced that there were going to be a whole bunch of new commanders in the decks. One for each enemy color pair, and one for each enemy wedge. When I saw Basandra Battle Seraph spoiled in the Heavenly Inferno deck, I decided that I wanted to make a deck around her. I had it built probably within a day or two on Cockatrice, but it took me a long time to get all the parts together. Even though the deck isn't very expensive, some of the cards in it just may be plain hard to find locally. Now, the story behind the deck was I had actually chosen to play Heavenly Inferno for the Commander release event at our store, even though I had bought all 5 decks on release day. And the main reason why is because the store for the promos, the oversized promos for each of the 5 commanders, they decided to give one out depending on the deck that you used. And this was the promo that no one wanted to get because it's definitely the worst of the 5 commanders. But to me, she presented a unique deck building challenge, and in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to go over the process of selecting cards for this deck and what I've come up with for the final 99. Another reason why my favorite part about Basandra is easily Therese Nielsen's artwork. I want to find a wallpaper image, like a wallpaper-sized image for her, but I can't find anything bigger than about 800 by 600. If any of you have a wallpaper-sized, at least 1024 by 768 image of Basandra, please let me know. Now, some of the choices that I have for this deck, I'm going to go through relatively quickly. I'm going to go ahead and start with my lands, because the lands are arguably the most important part of any deck. I don't have a lot of utility lands in the deck for a reason that you'll come to towards the end of the land section. Arid Mesa is a fetch land, can grab any one of our 2 dual lands. Ancient Amphitheater is essentially a Boros Guildgate until we have Boros Guildgate, and I'll probably run both in any case. It's just a red-white tap land. Sacred Foundry. Plateau. I have a real one, I just don't like bringing it with me, and our group doesn't care. Our group doesn't care about proxies and actually encourages doing so for lands to make, everybody able to not be mana screwed, because being mana screwed is one of the most frustrating things that can happen in the game. Clifftop Retreat, nice land. Often comes into play untapped because we have 28 lands that turn it on. Battlefield Forge, Pain Land. I don't know why they don't just print these, because I actually like those better than the core lands. Boros Garrison. Not a lot of people like the Karus because of the tempo hit, and just that there's wastelands everywhere. But most of the time, I think that people's wastelands are going to be going after Gaia's Cradles, Core Havens, Mazes, Cabal Coffers, things that need to be destroyed. Now, I am playing Forbidden Orchard in this deck, not for the mana fixing, but I'm playing it for another reason that you'll see a little bit later on in the presentation. Mistveil Plains is in here primarily for Sunforger abuse. I have a moderate-sized Sunforger package that I'll come into later in the video. Ghost Quarter is my answer to non-basic lands. Another reason why I'm playing Ghost Quarter is I'm also playing Faith's Reward in the deck, and I'm out of Tectonic Edges. All my Tectonic Edges are being used in other decks, and I've only got one Strip Mine at the moment. I know I should get more if I'm going to have multiple decks, but if you want to play this, ideally, this card should be Strip Mine. Terrain Generator is one of the big reasons why I play more basic lands in the deck. And I think this is a really underplayed card in monocolor decks, and even in two-color non-green decks that play a lot of basic lands. Because when you have extra mana floating around, you can use it to actually accelerate. It doesn't get you card advantage, but it does get you land faster. And I think it's very useful in a slow control deck like this. Yes, this is a control deck that actually utilizes Basandra's ability, and you'll see how it does that shortly. I'm playing Desert because it allows me to pick off little guys that aren't quite big enough to, or aren't quite small enough that my normal attack deterrents can pick them off. It's not really a good card, it's just on theme with the deck, and I wanted to use my From the Vault Realms Desert because no one else is using theirs. Reliquary Tower, because we're a control deck, we want to have tons of cards in hand. And really, I don't think there's a reason, unless you're a hyper aggro deck like Rafik, there's no reason not to play Reliquary Tower. And the rest of the deck is just basic lands. We have 11 plains and 15 mountains, I believe. Now, what the deck wants to do, and this really gets into the meat of the strategy, what this deck wants to do is it's more of a creature control deck in that it ideally wants to make combat a nightmare, and the main kill condition of this deck is Repercussion. The card reads, whenever a creature is dealt damage, Repercussion deals that much damage to that creature's controller. You can combine this with damage-based sweepers and do an absolutely absurd amount of damage. If you have effects that give a whole bunch of people tokens, or just there's token decks out there, you can basically kill the entire table with one sweeper, and you don't even have to worry about the damage you take, because since you control Repercussion, you can stack the triggers so that yours go on the stack first and will thus resolve last. But by the time your triggers would resolve, everybody else should be dead. Now, while you're getting set up, you do want to keep attention away from you because you don't have a lot of creature defenses. Matter of fact, I think the deck plays less than 10 creatures. Just because the way this deck works, creatures are a liability. I have Mazavith here. I put this with my spells rather than my lands, since it doesn't tap for mana unless somebody has a random Urborg out, and then Mazavith is amazing. I mean, it's already amazing, but then it just becomes more amazing. I would say when you're using like Eye of Ujin or Mazavith, it should be counted as a spell, not as a land. So this is my 40th quote-unquote land. I have Stuffy Doll in here. A lot of the older players may recognize this as the original, and it is. The M13 reprint was great because it brought down the price and let people get access to them. But I prefer the original art to the M13 art, especially in this deck, because I don't like the flavor of the M13 art. It's just way too creepy. This can let you target a player and deal them more damage with your sweepers. And one of my favorite things to do with this deck is because Stuffy Doll is indestructible, it can survive all the crossfire this deck puts out. And I just love having Stuffy Doll walk through a board of Powerstone Minefield, Furnace of Wrath, and just all these things that deal damage upon attacking, and there's a lot of them in here. Like Lightmine Field. Now this is a card that I don't think is playable anywhere except EDH, and only in a couple specific decks like this one. The effect is symmetrical, but the way the deck is built, it doesn't have to worry about that. Whenever one or more creatures attack, Lightmine Field deals damage to each of those creatures equal to the number of attacking creatures. This will stop tokens cold. And it really stops a lot of alpha strikes, except when you have just one giant creature. One giant creature is another thing that this deck has problems dealing with, but moderate size to big hordes, it has no problem answering. We have Ghostly Prison, which should divert attention to other people in the game. And this is strictly a multiplayer deck. It will not work 1v1 just because they can just choose to not attack. Have Aurification, which is another interesting choice. This card will turn any creature that deals damage to you into a defender, as long as that's on the board. But when that leaves play, they're no longer defenders. I think it's a really powerful deterrent to being attacked, because once your creatures attack once, they hit me, they can't attack anybody. They just sit there. Brigid, Hero of Kinsbaile, is one of my pet cards from Lorwyn block. I used to play Kithkin White Weenie, and I would regularly sideboard this card in against fairies, and it would just stop them cold. In this deck, when it plays with Repercussion, you can force all their creatures to attack with Basandra, and then deal 2 damage to each of them across the board, which in turn deals 2 damage for each of those creatures. It can make you really hard to attack, which obviously is the point of the deck. Now, Blazing Archon isn't that good when you're down to the last opponent, because it prevents creatures from attacking you entirely. But you can set up to go, I'm going to drop this guy, and then I'm going to make your creatures attack. You have to abide by all restrictions while following as many requirements as possible. So when you have this out and you force a creature to attack, it has to attack somebody other than you. Gisela, Blade of Goldnight, is fantastic. It's the good half of Furnace of Wrath and the good half of Ghosts of the Innocent in one card. And it can really, if you don't have the perfect setup for your Repercussion, will limit the amount of damage you take from it, and she can kill people in a hurry. Furnace of Wrath is, like I said, just not filler, it's redundancy. Sphere Safety is an addition from Return to Ravnica that stacks with all the enchantments in this deck. It's a Ghostly Prison that scales with the number of enchantments you control, and this deck plays 20-some enchantments. So it can make it very hard for you to be attacked. Windborn Muse is another Ghostly Prison effect, but it's on a creature, so you do have to be careful. Circle of Flame is... I don't know why this was Gateway promoted, because it's not a great card except in here. It causes all creatures that attack you or planeswalk you control to take 1 damage, unless the creatures have flying. Powerstone Minefield deals 2 damage to every attacking or blocking creature across the board. This, when you have a Furnace of Wrath effect out, can make it very hard for opponents to even attack. Now, because this one is symmetrical, it doesn't divert attention away from you. It does tend to make the table come after you a little bit, but by the time you have your setup up, they won't be able to do anything about it unless they have enchantment removal. And Caltrops is just half of a Powerstone Minefield. Now, you have all these ways to make it very hard to be attacked. Now, the other half of the equation is making other people attack. Just forcing their creatures to attack if possible. Bullwhip is more of a flavor inclusion because it's not a very good card. I figured I would include it because Basandra's wielding a giant metal scourge. And that's really one of the things I like about her, is she just has this "I'm gonna kill you in the most painful way possible" look on her face. It does deal a damage to a creature, so it can fuel your Repercussion, and it makes the creature attack if possible. Avatar of Slaughter came out of the command. I believe this was out of the same pre-constructed as Basandra herself. It's an 8/8 double striker. Well, it gives all creatures double strike and makes all creatures attack if possible. It's a bit of a dangerous card to play because it is one-sided and you can wind up falling into your own Repercussion trap. But generally, you should wipe out a lot of creatures when you play that, and it's huge, so it'll survive all your effects. Fumiko the Lowblood was a general that I thought would originally be better for this concept, but then you're missing out on all the white cards, so I just threw her in the 99. She makes all your opponent's creatures attack if possible, and she's an attack debtor in and of herself because she gets huge depending on the number of attackers. She can pick off an attacker herself, and your enchantments should do the job at keeping everyone's creatures away from you in the first place. Grand Melee is probably my favorite inclusion because this is such a zany red card. There's a lot of zany red cards that you won't see played in any other deck. This makes all creatures attack if possible and makes all creatures block if possible. If you can drop this with a Repercussion and a Power Stone out, you can just win. But one thing you do have to make sure you do when you play this card, if you do have some creatures, is declare your combat, pass your combat, and then play this post-combat so your creatures don't have to attack. War's Toll is a really annoying enchantment to play against. Now personally, I think that this is a great card for this kind of deck, but it will not make you very many friends at the table. One important note is that people can tap their lands in response to the triggered ability, so the way I would recommend playing this at kitchen tables is, say, at the end of the current phase, all of your lands are tapped and all of your mana is emptied. Or rather, at the end of the current step. Because what you're supposed to do is when an opponent taps land for mana, generally what they'll do is they'll tap out and declare what mana they're using. For the most part, it doesn't matter, and it makes the game take longer. But generally what this does is it prevents people from trying to do things during multiple parts of their turn, or multiple parts of the turn cycle for that matter. I love the card. And last but not least, we have Gideon, who can make all of one person's creatures attack Gideon. Now this won't make people pay mana for your ghostly prisons. Well, it can't anyway, but they won't have to pay mana to attack Gideon. Now, one thing I got into was the Sunforger package, and I think that's the next thing I should handle. If you're in red-white at all, you should probably be playing Sunforger. The card is absolutely bonkers, because it can turn just a few removal spells and other random things that you would play normally into a great toolbox. You can, the +4/+0 is nice too, but the main reason you're playing it is for the ability that says, red-white, unattached Sunforger, search your library for a red or white instant card with converted mana cost 4 or less, and cast that card for free. Master Warcraft basically lets you control one combat phase, but you do not get to choose who the creatures attack. That is one very important point to Master Warcraft. And I was actually, I believe, the first person to ask that question to a Wizard's Judge. Faith's Reward is mainly in here since we just die to enchantment wipes. I thought about playing Second Sunrise in here, but I found that Faith's Reward can be grabbed off Sunforger, so I don't think it's important to the redundancy isn't important, and I think the Second Sunrise slot is better served by other things. Enlightened Tutor can go grab basically whatever we want, whatever combo piece we're missing. Reiterate's just fantastic. One very neat thing you can do is if you cast Reiterate off a Sunforger, you can actually pay the buyback cost to put it back in your hand. And when people know Reiterate's there, they really don't want to play big spells. Like, you will never see somebody cast a Genesis Wave when they know there's a Reiterate in somebody's hand. Path to Exile, just really good. Wild Ricochet is a really annoying spell to have to play against. I've stolen people's time stretches, I've stolen people's briberies. I've stolen all kinds of spells from people with that. It's just great. Just a great card all around. Just that it goes into a Sunforger package is a huge bonus. Ablation is a great way to get rid of nasty commanders. You can use it to shuffle away stuff of yours that's being targeted with removal to draw cards in a pinch. There's all kinds of things you can do with this, but its main purpose is to get rid of commanders that just wreck your day. Orm's Thunder is basically a red-white staple. It reads essentially 2 red-white, destroy target enchantment, and destroy target creature. And last but not least, we have Chaos Warp, which is another card out of the commander decks. It lets you shuffle away a card on the board for something random from the top of the owner of the card's deck. Usually, you get the better end of the deal. And it's also a red way to get rid of enchantments, which I believe this is one of only 2 red cards that can deal with enchantments. There's this and Apocalypse. Being that we're a control deck, we do need ways to maintain card advantage. And we're going to be using both of the red wheels. Well, there are technically 3 wheels, but I don't like Wheel of Fate because people can prepare for it. I mean, the first one that we're going to play is obviously Wheel of Fortune, because Wheel of Fortune's amazing. Should be in just about every red deck. Reforge the Soul. I think I've miracled Reforge the Soul once in this deck. Usually, since you have a bunch of cards in hand, you just want to hold on to it and cast it for 5. It's still a draw 7. One thing that the suggestion that I took when Sheldon Menery put this deck on one of his SCG articles is I should try not playing Howling Mine effects. So I was looking for other sources of colorless draw. And Jayemdae Tome actually isn't bad. Once you get set up, you have nothing to spend your mana on. So this is essentially a colorless Phyrexian Arena. We have Baron's Codex, which you can draw a whole bunch of cards off this, but you do always need to be careful to keep 4 mana open, and it really sucks to have this thing Crows Engripped. This lets you put a counter on it at the beginning of your upkeep, and you can pay 4 and sack it to draw a card for each counter on it. Staff of Nin is a fantastic card. Plays with Repercussion, plays with your attack deterrents, and it draws cards. It's really good. I think this should be in almost every deck not playing blue. Mind's Eye is just sick. You know what? I should probably put my Commander's Arsenal Mind's Eye in this deck since I like playing it. And I don't know how many of you have seen the Commander's Arsenal Mind's Eye, but it's just stunning. Tower Fortunes. When you have all kinds of mana open, you can use this to Tidings every turn. Illuminated Folio is really underrated in mono red or mono white, and even in red white. It's essentially a 5 mana, draw an extra card every turn. I think every mono red deck should be playing this because it's just such a good source of draw that you can play in colors that are starved for draw. Now I want to get to my sweepers. Sunblast Angel is the only sweeper in the deck that isn't damage based. But because you're doing so much forced attacking, you can untap your creatures, like untap your permanents, cast Sunblast Angel to blow away everybody's creatures that you made attack, and start swinging with your commander or with some other dude you have floating around, like an Avatar Slaughter. Starstorm is really good. I used to play it in just about every red deck, like red-green deck that had all kinds of mana floating around, because it was an instant speed Rath that you could cycle early game if you didn't need it, or anytime you just didn't need a Rath or needed to draw an answer. Love the card. Chain Reaction. If you have a Repercussion, Chain Reaction should kill the table, especially if you're playing in a 4-player or 5-player game, because it deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures out there. Pyrohemia was a suggestion given to me by Sheldon. At least I think he suggested this card to me. This is a red Pestilence and plays really well with some of the cards, some of the defensive cards I haven't gotten to yet. You can pay red to deal 1 damage to each creature and each player, but if there are no more creatures, it goes away. I really like the name as well. It means burning blood. Blasphemous Act is essentially another chain reaction. It should explode the table all at once if you have Repercussion. Inferno is an instant speed Wrath, and Magma Quake is another instant speed Wrath. Now let's get to the rest of it. The rest of the deck is kind of a hodgepodge of cards, but they all have their purposes. Now, one thing that I didn't cover is why I was running Forbidden Orchard. After a while, people will start to realize that creatures are a liability and won't play creatures until they've blown up your enchantments. Well, Forbidden Orchard is in here to fix, yes, but its primary purpose is to give people creatures when they're reluctant to play creatures. Hunted Dragon is in here for the same reason. It gives target opponent 3 2/2s with first strike that generally are irrelevant because they'll die to your Powerstone Minefield or your Caltrops plus Furnace or Wrath, and the tokens can't do anything about something that's already swung for 6 or more in the air. Varchild's War Riders is in here for the same reason. It's a 3/4 with Trample and Rampage 1 for 2. The downside is it has a cumulative upkeep of giving an opponent a 1/1 red Survivor creature token. But that's all upside in here because 1/1s can't do a thing to this deck. 1/1s are really a liability, and it's just one of those cards that really would only get played in a deck like this. Soul Ring, because it's Soul Ring. Solemn Simulacrum, because it's essentially a 3-for-1. It trades with... Well, maybe not in this deck. Maybe it's just a 2-for-1, but it puts you ahead on mana and draws a card. And given the amount of things that deal damage to creatures in this deck, you can pretty much use it to draw a card at will. Top, because it's top. Humility is going to garner a lot of hate when you drop it, because it stops creature decks cold. When you have a Humility and a Powerstone Minefield, I actually used to play Aether Flash in this deck, but I took it out. If you have a Humility and Aether Flash in the deck, and you can get them both on the board, then it basically says creatures enter the battlefield dead. Just a back-breaking card that has to be dealt with. It might be a little bit hard to get a hold of because it is from 1998 and it is on the reserve list, so it's not getting reprinted anytime soon. Mark of Asylum is one of those defensive cards I mentioned earlier. It prevents all damage other than combat damage to creatures you control. I used to play Light of Sanction as well, but I found that the deck didn't need the redundancy, and it needed the deck space for other things. Basically, this makes all your creatures immune to the damage that your attack veterans would deal. Rune-tailed Kitsune Ascendant is what I ended up replacing Light of Sanction with. This is the guy that, when you have 30 or more life, he turns into an enchantment that makes all your creatures unable to be dealt damage. Idyllic Tutor searches for an enchantment, finds whatever you want. Greater Oromancy gives I don't play any auras in this deck, so the first line doesn't matter, or the second line rather, but this gives all your other enchantments Shroud, so they have to deal with that before they deal with any of them unless they play an enchantment wipe, and enchantment wipes are how you beat this deck. Oblivion Ring, because it's Oblivion Ring, and sometimes when you play, we have like this Idyllic Tutor and Enlightened Tutor, you just need to grab removal. Sun Titan can recur a few things in this deck. It's one of two ways I have to grab Repercussion out of my graveyard. It can get things like Oblivion Ring, Mark of Asylum. It can get enough things that it's worth running. And Open the Vaults is really a replacement for Replenish right now. I would like to put Replenish in here, but I can't find one. That's another card that's difficult to find because it's old. Out of Urza's Destiny, and it is on the reserve list. And finally, we have one of my favorite red cards in Commander, Radiate. It doesn't really have much to do with the deck, but it can lead to really screwy games. You point this card at a spell, or an instant or sorcery spell with one target that's a permanent or player, and for each other permanent or player that spell could target, a copy is made targeting that. So let's say somebody plays Mizium Mortars at somebody's creature. You can actually cast Radiate, targeting the mortars, and it will cause a copy of each of those to appear on the stack. So it'll essentially overload the spell. You can do this to all kinds of crazy things, like you'll just have to see it to believe it. Thank you everyone for watching this presentation of my Basandra Battle Seraph Commander deck as featured on CMDR decks. Please remember to like, favorite, and subscribe. Have a good one.